Recorded live from Hong Kong and Toronto. Let's go! This is the PR and Law Podcast.
The PR and Law Podcast.
Turn it up. With your hosts, Cam McMurchie and Ewan Chrissy.
We have made it to episode 62 of the PR and Law Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McMurchie, along with Ewan Chrissy.
Hello, Cameron.
Ewan is an employment lawyer and partner at Duntroon LLP in Toronto, Canada, and online at duntroon.law. I'm a PR guy in Hong Kong and publisher of the Digital Bits PR and Communications newsletter at digitalbitspr.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, please tell a friend. It's the only way we can really market the show. And you can follow us on social media as well, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and subscribe, if you prefer, on our YouTube or SoundCloud channels as well. And of course, our newsletter, PRLawPodcast.Club. We welcome you to sign up for that. Ewan, what is going on over in Toronto? I know in the west coast of Canada in the U.S., there's some crazy heat waves happening, but what's happening there?
Oh, yeah, it's hot. It is hot, my friend. It was pretty toasty here today, too. We got upwards of like high 30s. And that's centigrade, of course, Celsius, which we learned is about the same thing. Remember, we had a whole conversation about this before.
Yeah, and it hit 40 in Vancouver. It was over 40 in the Okanagan, which is another part of BC. And yeah, I mean, I saw the New York Times had a big feature just on the Pacific Northwest, Seattle and Portland and these places. And, there was a big heat wave, I believe it was last year or the year before, that got a lot of attention, mainly because there's just no air conditioning infrastructure in these places. It's not normally needed. But now this is another summer where it's just way out of hand again.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm very thankful for our central air. God bless our central air and air conditioning. It would not be a very pleasant experience without it.
Yeah, for sure. What else is happening there, Ewan? How's the COVID situation? Are you opening up for travel? Is that going to happen anytime soon?
Let's hope so. Yeah. We're getting there. They're going to let us on airplanes. If we can sort of prove that we're vaccinated, we can bring kids, even if they're non-vaccinated or unvaccinated, however you say that, however that goes. But, Toronto set a really cool record today, Cam. The Scotiabank Arena, which I'm sure you're at least somewhat familiar with. This is where the Toronto Raptors and the Toronto Maple Leafs play.
Yep.
They set a North American record today for the most COVID vaccine doses administered in a single day at a single clinic.
Oh, wow.
Of course, they converted the Scotiabank Arena into a clinic. Yeah. Not exactly your typical clinic.
Kind of an unfair advantage.
Exactly. The previous record was 17,003 doses, and that was administered at a drive-through at the Texas Motor Speedway in Fort Worth, Texas. Way to go, Texas! Back in April.
Yeah.
Well, the clinic at the Scotiabank Arena, and this is still going. I think they got a few more minutes here. It's Sunday night Toronto time, but it's past 24,000 doses just at the arena just today, which is pretty impressive and a really good sign of where we're going here in Canada.
Yeah, it's nice to see the vaccination rates just so high in both countries in general. I mean, I do get the feeling that that in North America they're putting the pandemic behind them quickly. I know it's still infecting people. There's still a lot of people that haven't been vaccinated. But in terms of percentage of the population, it's really encouraging. We're a couple of things over here. I think I mentioned last week that, there are countries that are starting to open up. Phuket in Thailand is one that's going to open next month. If you've been
Cam, get on the plane, go.
Hit the beach. I would love that. And then the other one is Taiwan has an interesting situation because they are having a bit of an outbreak there. But if you come from a country where COVID is a problem still, the government of Taiwan will pay for your quarantine hotel, which is an interesting decision. And that would theoretically bring in more tourists, you would think. Like if you wanted to visit Taiwan and you didn't have to put up the money for that COVID hotel, it makes it a little more tempting, I would say. So it's an interesting move by the government there.
Well, let's go to Taipei, Cam. You know, I used to live there. Still got some friends. Maybe that's where we go. What do you think?
Yeah, I love it.
Continue the debate with us on social media. Join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PRLawPodcast. All one word, PRLAW Podcast. Send us your questions now by email to askus@PRLawPodcast.com. That's all one word, askus@PRLawPodcast.com. Or on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. That's hashtag PRLAWPOD.
Take it away, Ewan.
Well, you know, Cam, we've talked about sort of independent contractors, the boom in independent contractors, you know, the gig worker phenomenon. But, you know, when you sort of use that phrase, gig worker, everybody always thinks of Uber drivers, food delivery people. Yep. Yeah, right. These sort of kind of or entry level positions or lower paying jobs. You don't really think of those sort of more professional or white collar positions.
Right.
Well, the numbers, though, Cam, they kind of suggest otherwise. So, you know, gig workers, and this is in a pre-pandemic context. And this is based on some Canadian data, but I mean, the data in the US is pretty comparable in terms of the percentages around this. We're talking about 20 to 30% of professional workers pre-COVID were freelancing or in some independent contractor relationship. So, you know, why are we talking about this? Because I think that number is going to continue to grow, if not explode.
I'm surprised it was so high at 30% even before the pandemic, though. Like that's a large number of workers already.
I mean, between 20 and 30. So I guess it could be 20 on the low end, 30 on the high end. But even if you were to sort of take the number in the middle, Cam, that's, you know, we're talking like 1 in 4 employees, professionals that are freelancing or in some independent contract relationship.
So
right?
This would include probably like some people who are they might even be working in an office somewhere day to day, but they're just a contractor rather than employee. Because I know that has been something obviously that's become more attractive to employers for obvious reasons, such as benefits and things like that. But yeah, I guess this is going to be something that really picks up speed because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. And also because we're moving to more sort of flexible work arrangements. And again, it's going to be really fascinating to see how all of this plays out, right? There's a real tug of war already starting in employment circles of employers saying like, hey, you're coming back to work. Employees saying, I don't want to go back to work. And the employer saying, well, here's the thing. You don't really have a choice, right? Unless you need some sort of special accommodation to continue to stay at home, you're coming back to work if I tell you you're coming back to work. But for those employers who are moving to more of a hybrid model, and we've certainly talked about a lot of different companies who are looking at that, I think the independent contractor relationship is a really good opportunity for employers to sort of develop a more flexible workforce and focus on more sort of tailor-made job roles. And I think that's really going to help employers sort of access a larger talent pool, first of all, because, they're not necessarily bound by geographical restrictions. And, it should also help employers just generally save on recruiting and other sort of typical expenses associated with the hiring process.
Yeah, I can see the benefits there. I guess my concern really would be around, the benefits, particularly in the United States where, healthcare is often a benefit that comes through your employer. And I think, we're fortunate as Canadians that we never really had to worry about that sort of thing. But I know in the U.S. that's a big deal. So there are benefits, as you just laid out, for employees as well, to kind of pick the kind of working style that they want and be flexible if they want, and maybe be remote if they want, and be able to work, for a company in another city than their own because they can work remotely. Those are definitely benefits, but there is that sort of downside to it as well if more employers kind of go this route, theoretically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to sort of talk about increased flexibility for employees in terms of the where, how, when, and whom they're sort of providing their labor to. But yeah, I mean, you raise a good point. There's a reason why independent contractors and precarious employment have gone hand in hand. And that's because more often than not, they're not receiving any of the typical benefits that employees receive, such as, paid vacation or sick leave, any number of other issues that are sort of, baked into the typical terms of an employment agreement. So, yeah, I mean, that's an issue. So you've really got to have to going to weigh pros and cons as an employee in terms of what do I want out of my labor going forward? What am I looking for? Am I looking for that flexibility? I mean, if that's what you want, I think you're going to have an easier time, arguably, than ever before, sort of meeting those goals. But inevitably, there's going to be some consequences. There's always going to be a trade-off here, much like what there will be for employers. And I think sort of the big thing for employers, if they are going to move to more of these models, is they've got to make sure those contracts and agreements are being reviewed by employment lawyers to make sure that the nature of the relationship is what they intended to be. Because just because they say, oh, hey, we're hiring you as an independent contractor, that doesn't mean that that's what the relationship is. It very well could be an employer-employee relationship, despite sort of the employer's best intentions to the contrary.
What does that mean exactly, though? Because even if it's an independent contractor, if you're being hired by a company, you're still reporting to somebody because you have a deliverable or you have tasks that you're contracted to do. So how would the nature of the relationship, I guess, be different?
Yeah. And I mean, this really sort of depends on from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But if I hire you, Cam, as my employee, and I hire you as an independent contractor, and I present to you some sort of independent contractor agreement, clearly setting out and stipulating that, you are not my employee. I will not be providing you with vacation pay. I will not be deducting employment insurance or Canada Pension Plan, these sorts of things. That doesn't really matter if, for example, you are working for me full time. You're coming into my office. You're not working for anybody else. You're using my tools and my equipment. Then from the perspective of the court and employment legislation, you're an employee, whether you want to be or not, whether I want you to be or not. So that's why it's really critically important that employers and employees as well, because there are consequences from an employee there as well if they're operating under an assumption that they're an independent contractor because they want to be, and the law would characterize them as an employee. So on both sides of the fence, make sure you have somebody look at the agreement to make sure that you're signing up for what you actually think you're signing up for.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of like common law, living common law, right? Like, I mean, if you get divorced, it's kind of 50-50 with the family assets. And then if you're living common law but not married, you still may do that just because you are living in a situation that is akin to a marriage. Therefore, the settlement or the separation is kind of treated the same way. It sounds like that by what you're explaining. If you're showing up at work every day and you have a boss and you have no other job, that just looks like a regular employer-employee relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, really, I think where you're sort of hitting the nail on the head is that the relationship or the situation that you think you're engaged in isn't necessarily the situation or relationship that you are actually engaged in. So make sure that you're sort of clarifying the terms of the agreement, right? In any event, I think we're going to continue to see a boom in independent contractors going forward because, there's a lot of employers there who, much like the employees, who are taking stock of things and thinking, so wait a minute, I don't have to go back to an office 5 days a week. I don't have to do that anymore. I have alternatives. Employers are asking themselves those same questions as well. And they're going to be looking to get some sort of benefit out of all this. And if they can create and craft more tailor-made arrangements with independent contractors working in sort of a discrete matter, for example, and that will help them to sort of further reduce overhead. Really, I mean, there is no better time to sort of redraw and reestablish those boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm. Ewan, I mean, if there are people out there, people listening who are working full-time somewhere, or maybe even part-time, and they're being asked to go back into an office most of the time, and they don't want to do that, but they don't really want to quit their job either, because there's obviously a certain level of anxiety around that. I mean, what would you advise them? Would you say they should talk to their boss or their supervisor about the potential of working from home, or what should they look out for?
They absolutely should engage in that conversation, because I mean, from a legal perspective, they don't really have many options, at least here in Ontario anyway. Again, unless they require some particular accommodation. So yeah, I mean, don't lawyer up in a scenario like that with something ridiculous like, oh, I can't work because of made up circumstance or made up situation. Rather, sit down and have an honest and frank discussion with your employer and say, look, this is where I'm at. Things have really changed for me over the last year. My priorities have shifted, but I want to continue to work here, just not in the capacity that I have been. Can we come to some sort of arrangement? And I think most employers, if you have a really good employee, you're going to do whatever you can to keep that employee, right? And that may include crafting a more flexible arrangement, such as, sure, you can work from home 2 days a week, but I want you in the office the other 3, or something along those lines. But really, you don't know unless you engage in that discussion. And the surefire way to do it is, schedule a meeting or a call with your boss and be frank and open and see what happens. That's really the best way to go about it. Yeah.
I mean, you say if it's a good employee, the employer's going to want to keep the employee. But I guess on the other side of that is also the calculation of, if I acquiesce or if I'm flexible and give this to you, this may be opening Pandora's box for everybody else on the staff. And so that would be an argument if the employer was not comfortable, with remote work, that would give them a reason maybe to not take your request seriously or not grant your request. But I guess, I mean, that's just a hazard. That's just a potential result, I guess, out of this. There's no guarantee, that people are going to be able to work remotely. But we are seeing, especially again in the United States and parts of Europe, that people are walking away from jobs right now at quite the clip. There's a lot of positions unfilled because people are just not willing to go back to the life that they had before.
Yeah, you're right. And I think you're also right that it is opening Pandora's box. But it opens Pandora's box both ways, in so much as, well, if I give it to this person, does that mean I have to give it to everybody else? But it also means that if I don't give it to this person, does that mean that I theoretically could then lose a whole bunch of good employees that I want to keep around, who are going to immediately start applying to competitors who are prepared to offer those sort of alternate arrangements and more flexible work arrangements? That's sort of the thing that employers have to be concerned about and watch out for. So yeah, I mean, really the whole landscape around this stuff is just changing in real time, and it's a really complicated process for employers, and they should seek counsel on these issues. Don't try and figure this stuff out on your own. It's complicated, and I think it's going to remain complicated for the foreseeable future.
Show your support to the PR and Law podcast by making a one-time donation or setting up a subscription with us on Patreon. Every little bit helps us keep the lights on and bring the show to you each week. If you'd like to chip in, please visit PRLawPodcast.com. That's PRLawPodcast.com. Click support the show. Thanks for helping us out.
So, Ewan, we've talked about Jeffrey Toobin a lot on this show, the former New Yorker writer. Yeah, I'm returning to that well, as it were. And I know, we discussed him a little bit a couple of episodes ago, and I want to go a little deeper into this, only because, in one of the sort of PR trade magazines that I read, there was quite a lengthy article that looked at how CNN handled Jeffrey Toobin's return to the airwaves. Because, as we touched on, it was quite awkward at times. And, CNN, Alison Camerata, who was actually a former Fox News host, basically introduced Jeffrey Toobin and went through the accusations against him. And they addressed it in a really kind of open way. And just in case our listeners haven't heard that yet, I just want to play that part. When Camerata begins to talk about this, when she begins to discuss Jeffrey Toobin. Here it is.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello, Allison.
It's been a while.
It has been a while, indeed.
I feel like we should address what's happened in the months since we've seen you, since some of our viewers may not know what has happened. So I guess I'll recap. I'll do the honors.
Help yourself.
Okay. In October, you were on a Zoom call with your colleagues from the New Yorker magazine. Everyone took a break for several minutes, during which time you were caught masturbating on camera. You were subsequently fired from that job after 27 years of working there. And you, since then, have been on leave from CNN. Do I have all that right?
You got it all right. Sad to say.
Okay, so let's start there.
Okay.
To quote Jay Leno, what the hell were you thinking?
What did you think about that, Ewan? How CNN handled that?
I'm glad you brought this up because I watched this with great discomfort. And what I thought was really interesting is there was so much in sort of the Twitterverse about, oh, that must have been so awkward for Jeffrey Toobin, and it looked so uncomfortable for Jeffrey Toobin. But I mean, what about Allison, right? I mean, I can't even imagine the Allison Camerata's position in sort of being put forth to have to deal with that and have to address it. And I understand she's a journalist and, journalists have to ask difficult questions and are put in difficult situations. But I really, really, really felt for her and having to even engage in this whole discussion. I mean, for our listeners, if you haven't seen the video, my gosh, believe me, it is so much more uncomfortable than what even the uncomfortable audio might suggest.
Yeah, and the audio is uncomfortable too. She handles herself extremely well here, I think. And at the beginning, you can see where she just says, "Okay, like let's do this," kind of thing. And it's almost like just going to the dentist. It might hurt, it might be uncomfortable, but you've just got to be brave and go in there and do it. And that's what she did. Now, this was obviously a decision of CNN to approach it this way and to really sort of hit this head on, which is, it's an interesting choice, but I think it was effective. I want to come back to that in a second, but first I'm gonna put Jeffrey Toobin's answer here as well. So she asked him, what were you thinking? And here's what Jeffrey Toobin had to say.
Well, obviously, I wasn't thinking very well or very much, and it was something that was inexplicable to me. I think one point, I wouldn't exactly say in my defense, because nothing is really in my defense. I didn't think I was on the call. I didn't think other people could see me.
You thought that you had turned off your camera?
Correct. I thought that I had turned off the Zoom call. Now, that's not a defense. This was deeply moronic and indefensible, but I mean, that is part of that is part of the story. And I have spent the 7 subsequent months, miserable months in my life, I can certainly confess, trying to be a better person. I mean, in therapy, trying to do some public service, working in a food bank, which I certainly am going to continue to do, working on a new book about the Oklahoma City bombing, but I am trying to become the kind of person that people can trust again.
There's a lot to unpack in this answer.
Oh, it's so weird.
Yeah. So first of all, he does use a very, very tried and true PR technique here in that he says, in my defense or not in my defense. And he talks about the fact that he didn't think he was on camera. Now, obviously, that is him defending himself. That is him pointing out, hey, I didn't know. But he can't appear to be trying to defend himself and justify it. So he couches it in language of, this is indefensible, not in my defense, but. And I mean, this is a very common sort of trope where you do apologize or you do defend yourself, but you couch it in language where you're not or you can't defend yourself. But you still get your message out there, which is really important. The parts that I had a hard time with personally were just the parts around the food bank and therapy and things like that. Now, what is the therapy about? Because, I mean, theoretically, masturbating is normal. So, and it was an accident that he was on the Zoom call, as he was explaining. So what, because he said, I'm going to therapy to be somebody that people can trust again. And I found that a bit odd to my ears. based on what happened. What do you
Yes,
think?
me too. I think it was specifically the line, "I'm trying to be a better person," right? It's like, what does that mean? So a person who doesn't masturbate, is that better person that you're trying to be, and through public service and therapy you're hoping to get there?
Yeah, or is it, I'm trying to be a better person who turns off his camera before he masturbates? Like I don't, it's odd. Like, it was a mistake. And then I like the food bank part also kind of confused me. I'm not, and I have seen some criticism that this is kind of, what high profile people think they should do is go work in a soup kitchen or a food bank or something. But it seems very random. If the offense was somehow related to, the underclass, or if there was some sort of class issue in what he had done wrong, I would see. But I'm not sure where. I can't see how that integrates into what the actual offense was here, and why that was something that he figured he should do. That also confused me.
Exactly, and that's what's missing, right? There's sort of a lack of addressing what the core issue is. It's more a situation of almost like classic penance, right? Mm-hmm. Of, you did this thing, now I have to pay penance. I need to be punished, so this is what I'm going to do, public service and yada, yada, yada. But at no point is the core issue actually being even spoken to, never mind actually addressed.
Right. And now, that is, he does speak for another 7 minutes or so. It's a longer segment.
Yeah, it's awkward. It seems like it goes on forever.
It's quite a long one. And there will be a link in the show notes if you guys want to go have a look. But I wanted to talk about the breakdown done by Evan Neerman in the Media Post. And I do agree with his sort of broad conclusions. And one is that, he called this a masterclass on how to appropriately address a stunningly uncomfortable situation. And, one of the things that he points out is that Jeffrey Toobin could have returned to CNN's airwaves. They could have just had him pop up, quickly in a story somewhere, or, just sort of get back on the job and slowly ease him into the daily grind again. But they didn't, and they just addressed this horribly uncomfortable situation really head on. And I do give CNN credit for that. It was uncomfortable to watch. I think everybody who sees that, nobody's going to say that, Allison and Jeffrey were both relaxed for this. I mean, it was an odd situation. But the fact that CNN went about it this way, I do think was a good way to do it, because there's going to be, people like me who are playing these clips on shows, and it did happen a lot. I mean, there was a lot of ridicule out there for Toobin mainly, and some sympathy for Camerata. But you get past it, and now he can appear on those airwaves and continue on, and it's been dealt with. There's not going to be any more to this unless he makes another mistake. Yeah,
I thought, one thing that I thought was really interesting about the initial comment was, the line that Allison drops about, to quote Jay Leno, "What the hell were you thinking?" Because, of course, that's an allusion to Hugh Grant, who was caught with a prostitute, and rather infamously, had that question put to him by Jay Leno when he was trying to do his mea culpa. And I thought that was sort of an interesting reference point for those who are old enough to sort of get it, because it's almost as though they're trying to frame it in that context of, this was something that was almost sort of silly. Shall I say? Can I say that? Silly. And, let's sort of poke fun at it the way that Jay poked fun at Hugh Grant, who then, very quickly went on to, continue with his career like nothing had happened, right? It was an interesting allusion, I thought.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from. I don't think that CNN was trying to make it silly, though. Like, I think they did treat this with quite a bit of seriousness, actually. Just the way she kind of came into the segment, it was kind of like they went back and forth. There was not joking around or made it seem light. I think if anything, she did make it seem like something serious, and he did as well in terms of sort of how he was apologizing for what happened. And that's another point that was mentioned by Neerman in his article, is that, Toobin did a good job of sort of presenting himself as a flawed human who makes mistakes. And that's something that he does say in answers after the clip that I played. And he called what he did deeply moronic and indefensible. Like, any time a public figure or anybody is caught in a scandal or has done something wrong, this is kind of the playbook. Come out and really apologize, take ownership, be accountable for that. And I think Toobin did that. And the other thing that Neerman said is that Toobin was calm, serious, the entire time. And I think that was, he deserves praise for that as well. I think that was also a good approach. He was uncomfortable, but he wasn't making light of it. He wasn't making it into something that we could be making jokes about. He does take it seriously, even though the situation seems so odd that it's crying out for somebody to sort of break the ice. He treats it with the seriousness that it deserves.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I also just liked deeply moronic, indefensible. As far as apologies go, I mean that's pretty good language to work with.
Deeply moronic. On the other end of the scale, Ewan, is Chrissy Teigen, the famous model, and I don't know, I guess we can call her a Twitter troll. She it came to light several weeks ago now that she had been bullying people online. Actually, people were aware of this, but a woman named Courtney Stoddard was interviewed and talked about how the bullying that Chrissy did of her really impacted her in a really negative way. And, sure enough, Chrissy Teigen has been one of the internet's big trolls, you could say, if you look back through her Twitter feed. She's really poked fun and said some awful things to certain people. One of the examples is about 8 to 10 years ago or so, I don't have the exact year here. She poked fun at a Saturday Night Live actor's announcement that he had a son, and they named their son Meredith. And Chrissy Teigen went to town on that and said just some awful things to this new dad. And yeah, sure enough, there's a long track record there. And it's finally come back to her, and she's really been put on the hot seat. And she too has been trying to apologize for some of her very bad behavior. And the interesting thing is, it's not getting the same respect that Jeffrey Toobin's has. Now, in her case, she wrote a Medium post. It's a 5-minute read. And again, you can go and take a look at it. And she does take responsibility as well. And so in one part, Ewan, she writes, quote, "As you know, a bunch of my old awful tweets resurfaced. I'm truly ashamed of them. As I look at them and understand the hurt they caused, I have to stop and wonder, how could I have done that?" And she takes ownership. Why, Ewan, do you think this isn't sticking the way that Toobin's apology did?
I mean, it's not one-off, right? I mean, you're talking about a pattern of behavior over a prolonged period of time. That is precisely the sort of situation where people are not going to cut you some slack. It looks really, really bad. It's also just voluntary and self-imposed because it's over Twitter. I mean, nobody sort of put a gun to your head and said, "Hey, comment on this individual who chose to name their child Meredith." I mean, that was entirely of your own volition.
Mm-hmm. And there's many similar examples. Now, here's something she wrote in her Medium post, Ewan. Quote, "Now, confronted with some of the things that I said, I cringe to my core. I'll honestly get sharp stabbing pains in my body, randomly remembering my asshole past, and I deserve it. Words have consequences, and there are real people behind the Twitter handles I went after. I wasn't just attacking some random avatar, but hurting young women, some who were still girls who had feelings. How could I not stop and think of that? Why did I think there was some invisible psycho-celebrity formula that prevents anyone with more followers from experiencing pain? How did I not realize my words were cruel? What gave me the right to say these things?"
Well, it doesn't read like it was written by a PR person.
No, that's right. You can tell she wrote this, kind of. I think you really hit the nail on the head, Ewan. This isn't a one-off. Jeffrey Toobin's case was an embarrassing, almost a tech mistake, right? Like he's a boomer who didn't know how to operate his webcam and made a big mistake. But other than that, has a pretty good record, right? I mean, he worked at the New Yorker for 27 years. He's not somebody that the public has really taken aim at many times in the past for his behavior. You can see it was something that really humiliated him deeply, and he apologized and addressed it in the most sort of humiliating way on CNN. Whereas, yeah, Chrissy Teigen, this is a pattern of behavior over a decade. And I assume before Twitter, she may have been like this in person, right? I mean, usually it's not just one-offs on Twitter either. The apology here, she has to do a bit more, you know, to really have us forgive some of that behavior.
Yeah, well, and also let's keep in mind Jeffrey Toobin was fired from the New Yorker for that misconduct, and arguably justifiably so, right? Mm-hmm. Because he was engaged in an employment context, right? I mean, he had colleagues online, and from an employment perspective, you know, we can call it tech mishap, we can call it whatever you want, but the reality is that you're engaged in a work function with your colleagues, and it's really no different than him sort of doing the same thing had he done so within a boardroom with his colleagues sitting around, right? And clearly that was how the New Yorker saw it, and he paid the price. He lost his job for it, and again, I think justifiably so. So it's not as though he got, he wasn't punished for the behavior after the fact.
Yeah, the two situations are just really different, and I think that's why, you know, Chrissy Teigen is having such a hard time. And, you know, I gotta say, Ewan, I think this is interesting for non-comms people, I'm going to guess, because you do take two situations where two, you know, prominent or high-profile people have done something wrong, and both of them have come forward in a public way to address it and to apologize, and yet it works for one person and it doesn't work for another person. And I think sometimes that can confuse people because it kind of looks like one size fits all. You make a mistake, you apologize, you own it, and you move on. But it's not that simple. And I think these are the little contours of the problem that are just unique for each problem and unique for each solution. And it's not one size fits all. And, you know, I was thinking, like, what could Chrissy Teigen do, you know, to try and rehabilitate her reputation or to, you know, get more credibility in terms of her apology? And, you know, one of the things I was thinking about is she could reach out to the people that she hurt directly, phone them, apologize to them, talk to them on the phone, and do it one by one. You know, something like that where she's actually taking time and going through something that would be, you know, for sure that would be uncomfortable for her to do that, right? I mean, she's also a famous model with a global reach. And a lot of the people that she's insulted are not at that level. And so doing this, I'm sure, would not be pleasant for her. But I think it would go a long way to proving that she's serious about what she's saying. And I think that's really what's kind of missing at this point, despite, you know, her words that indicate that she is taking it seriously.
Yeah, someone lend some authenticity to the apology, right? That's clearly just falling flat right now.
Wait a minute. Check this out.
Whoa, hey, check this out.
No, wait. Check it out.
I want you to check this out.
On the PR and Law podcast.
All right, Ewan, what have you got?
This is a great article, Cam. Another one of these long form articles that I love, and I know you love as well, out of Harper's Magazine. The title is Hard Bargain, How Amazon Turned a Generation Against Labor. And it's written by Daniel Brook. Mm-hmm. And he looks at the unionization effort that Amazon went through at their quote unquote fulfillment center in Bessemer, Alabama.
Yep.
And this is just an incredible story. I mean, you know, we talked about this event on the show, the union drive that made sort of national headlines, touched on all of those typical pro and anti-union sentiment issues that we sort of typically see. Mm-hmm. But what most of the stories, at least that I read, missed, Cam, was really what was going on the ground level in terms of, you know, with the people themselves, the workers themselves, the political and economic history of Bessemer, the racial socioeconomic divides in Bessemer. And this article just digs into all of that stuff. It goes back to the early 1900s and leads right up to, you know, the economic depression after steel left Bessemer, to show how Amazon even ended up there in the first place in 2018. It just gives you all of the aspects of this really, truly sort of American story in a really just thorough way that I found a lot of the other articles I read around this issue sorely lacked. It's really well worth your time, although it will take a great deal of time. It's a pretty long form piece, but really amazing story.
Well, I love stuff like that, so for sure, I will read that. I am going to share something, Ewan, that's going to be really hard to share on a podcast, but it's a graphic. It's a chart that was put onto CNN, and Ewan, I'm actually just sending it over to you right now, so you can take a look at it. I am going to include this chart in the show notes as the actual image. And I came across this on Twitter, and somebody said, this chart is a work of art. I hope multiple people got paid well to make it, and I hope they get hit by a bus. Have a look at the chart. The title of the chart is Violent Crime is a Very Big Problem. And under that, it says adults. And then you look at the chart, and there's an X and a Y axis for sure. And then, at the X-axis says 48% for April 2021. June, 41%, but that's June 2020. It's going backwards, first of all. And there are about 7 or 8 things wrong with this chart. And it's funny because if you take a look at some of the comments on Twitter, it is hilarious. Because the longer you look at this thing, the more problems you will find with it. And nobody has any idea what it's actually trying to say. And I want to post this for people just so they can have a look at it, give it some thought. And this is why you need people who understand this stuff and will look over something before it hits the airwaves. To me, this just screams of, interns rushing around in the background at CNN, and this somehow getting thrown up on the screen. It's remarkable, really.
Well, I'm just looking at it now. What? It's like a joke, but I guess it's not a joke.
It's clearly like a joke. You look like it. At first you go, okay. And then you keep looking at it and go, but this, and then you just get more and more questions when you look at it. I honestly don't know what it's saying to me, but there you go.
Huh. Yeah. It starts in 2021 and finishes in 2018. And wow. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Great.
It's a funny one. So there you go. Something light to begin the week.
Good. We need more of that stuff probably on our show, don't we, Cam?
We sure do. Ewan, anything else you want to say before we wrap up number 62?
No, Cam, other than I understand the that COVID thing going on at the Scotiabank Center has cracked 26,000. 26,000. Isn't that amazing?
It is absolutely fantastic news. I think we need to do whatever you guys are doing at Scotiabank. There needs to be replicated across the world, particularly in Brazil, India, places like that. It's a good sign.
Yeah, I feel like there's a bad Leafs joke in here somewhere. Their inability to win, but we're I don't know.
Well, Montreal
there's a bad Leaf joke there somewhere.
Are in the Stanley Cup final. It's going to be...
Yes, the Canadian team off to the Stanley Cup. Why, yes, we should be talking about that. That's fantastic news.
First time since 2011 that a Canadian team has been in the Stanley Cup final. I think Tampa is going to win it in 4 or 5 games, but I am cheering for Montreal.
Well, hey, that's what everybody said in every series the Habs have had so far.
The Habs, they are
your tongue, Cameron.
The worst team to make the playoffs in like 100 years because they finished 18th in points, which is way beyond what the playoff bar is supposed to be. And now they're in the Stanley Cup final.
Incredible.
Yeah. So thanks everybody again this week for joining us. We've got some pretty interesting plans for the show coming up. So definitely subscribe to us on the newsletter at PRLawPodcast.Club. Check us out on social media as well. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. We're on all of those channels. You can find out when new shows are coming out. You can find out how you can participate on the show as well. So, for you and Christy, this is Cam McMurtry. Light it up.
This has been the PR and Law Podcast with Cam McMurtry and Ewan Christie. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. You can also join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by following our account at PRLawPodcast. That's all one word, PRLAW Podcast. Thanks for your support.